Grand Theft Auto. 3 words that are likely to reignite memories of gaming past. Or present, depending on who you ask. GTA is one of those franchises that never seems to be fully behind the curve in the gaming landscape. Sure, it hasn't had a game in close to... wait, actually more than a decade. Wow. Christ. GTA 5 came out 10 years ago. And I'm actually old enough to remember that like it was yesterday. I mean, I'm not actually that old. Hell, I was only 6 when that game came out. Yes, this does regrettably make me a zoomer, but I digress. But still, that's how long it's been since the series has had an actual numbered installment. But we're not here to talk about that game or any of the drama surrounding it or its now delayed sequel. No. We're here to go even further back to the year 2008. A year I have no recollection of because I was 1, but in hindsight it was quite a year for gaming. Fallout 3, MGS4, Little Big Planet, Left 4 Dead, and the biggest release of that year, Grand Theft Auto 4, which is the topic of today's monumental video essay. Monumental only in length, I'm sure this kind of video has been done thousands of times about this game. Anyways, GTA 4 is, shocker, the 4th main installment in the Grand Theft Auto series. Well, 4th numbered entry anyways. To this day, it still holds the highest aggregate critical review scores out of any game in the entire series, sitting at an astounding 98 out of 100, some even calling it one of the greatest games of all time. But what makes this game so much more of a critical darling than its peers? Well, most of it comes down to its story, a far more sobering tale of a crime drama compared to its predecessors, easily having the most layered story in the series when it comes to characters, themes, and, well, you get the picture, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. While its story remains a pretty open and shut book of success though, many of its other features have caused it to gain a surprisingly polarizing reputation among fans. Actually, that goes for pretty much every aspect, I should say. While critique of the story is almost always leaning in the positive direction, almost every other feature is a divisive one. The driving, the shooting, the map, both the physical space you play in and the minimap itself, the moment-to-moment gameplay, just everything. Again, I'm getting far ahead of myself, and because I know this video is going to be not even just remotely short, I'm just going to cut to the chase and jump right into things. This is going to be more of a traditional review style video. Considering the fact that I have about 20 hours of footage to sift through, going through the exact chronological events of what happened in my playthrough could actually take like 3 hours. And as much as I've enjoyed wasting my audience's time in the past, I want to throw y'all a bone here. Because at the end of the day, despite this game's arching story being, well, pretty great, the moment-to-moment storytelling can leave a lot to be desired. A point that I will get to more thoroughly in the story section of this video. If I tried to go through a play-by-play of every mission though, a lot of this video would be me just talking about how you go to this place and you killed this person, and then drove back. Rinse and repeat. So instead I'm breaking this video up into sections based on the gameplay and then the broad strokes of the story later on. A good open-world game can only be carried so far by its systems. One of the most overlooked things in open-world games is the fact that the very map the game takes place in generally has to be pretty good for the game to be, good. The map has to accommodate the gameplay, and vice versa. Breath of the Wild is a fantastic game, and on that hand, so is Far Cry 3. But drop the mechanics of Breath of the Wild into Far Cry's map, and do the same to Far Cry 3 into Breath of the Wild's map, and you're going to have a much different experience. Likely a substantially worse one. I am bringing all of this up because the maps in GTA games are often touted as some of the best in the business, masterclasses in open-world game design, both just for the time and how well they stood up to modern standards, and GTA 4 is no exception to this rule. Despite the fact that it has gotten some, let's just say, complaints for being a step down from the size of San Andreas, it still retains a very sizable chunk of real estate. Bogus gamer studies have generally concluded that 4's map is only a paltry fourth of San Andreas' map. And while that does sound like a pretty substantial downgrade on the surface, you can't scoff at what you're getting. The world was, for the time anyways, the most detailed and believable rendition of a modern cityscape in gaming. If you want a comparison, let's go back and look at the numerical prequel to this game, GTA 3, set in the very same city we find ourselves in now. Compared to 3, 4 is just light years ahead, not just because of sheer graphical fidelity, but also because of the... well, I hate to kind of use this word in a more serious context, but the vibes, just the vibes. That, and despite taking place in the same city on paper, the map is almost entirely different. After making these kind of games for a decade, Rockstar had started to master the craft of making a place feel like, well, a place. GTA 3's Liberty City is a surrealist hellscape filled with ant-like NPCs, working to keep the facade of a then contemporary 2001 New York City running. GTA 4's Liberty, on the other hand, is almost there, and by there I mean the game immerses the player enough to the point where they can almost accept that this is a real place. Even now, we're not quite there yet, but this is the game that is still, in my mind, the first that ever came close to it. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong. The NPCs roaming the streets at all hours of the day are also almost entirely aimless, unless their aim is to kill the player, and then they will attempt to do so with a Terminator-like fixation until they accomplish their goal or are terminated themselves. but compared to 3, a lot more is done to engross the player in its world. Gameplay-wise, there's just a lot more going on. Physical brick-and-mortar establishments that you can just enter to buy things, even if that establishment is literally only used for a single mission, or for something that you only do every now and then. But they make the world feel so much more real. Hell, you even see people sitting around in some of these places indulging in some mundane activities like eating or pantomiming the use of a computer the best they could. These aren't entirely new things, of course. GTA San Andreas and Vice City had interiors, San Andreas of course having a wider variety of interiors to choose from. That and entering a building is just a seamless transition now. In the 3D era of games, whenever you wanted to enter a building, there would have to be a black loading screen in between every transition. Now all you need to do is just walk in the door. Such a simple and small detail, but for someone who's been playing a lot of these games like me, it's a well-appreciated one. Another thing that I think makes this game's world so just utterly brilliant is the fact that it is practically a time capsule of 2008. Not just of 2008 pop culture, mind you, although there is definitely plenty of that, but the everything. Vice City was a love letter to the neon-soaked crime dramas of the 80s, a la Miami Vice, while San Andreas was a play on the 1990s gang culture, and all of the social zeitgeist that came with that. The one exception to that rule of the original trilogy being GTA 3. But even then, that game was more of a spoof of a contemporary 2001 New York. It is almost cartoonish in its portrayal of a city, and while a lot of that does come from the way the game just looks, which is understandably dated by modern standards, even a bigger chunk of that just comes from the fact that the game is just silly. Meanwhile, GTA 4 takes a much more serious approach to tackling a modern cityscape. And yes, you could argue that Rockstar has been trying to do that from the beginning, but I feel like now that Rockstar had the budget and the technology, they could finally do that. And again, it shows. At times, this game feels like stepping through a time machine back into 2008 New York City. Almost to the point of being nostalgic for a time that I never lived in. The entire game just oozes with this late 2000s energy, from the music to the clothing to the people to the cars to just the technology. It feels like you've been pulled back in time. It's honestly kind of crazy. Before I go on, I should probably at least touch on the game's story, because it definitely requires a little bit more setup than previous games. You play as Niko Bellic, a former soldier from some armpit in Eastern Europe where he fought in the Yugoslav wars in the 90s. He's come to America in search of something. Someone, to be more specific, but we'll get to that later. He's specifically chosen to come to Liberty City because his cousin, Roman, who he is very close with, has lived here for almost an entire decade prior to the events of the game. Roman has been boasting of great success here in America, often sending letters of his grandiose lifestyle back to his family in the old country. Niko quickly finds that this is all entirely bullshit, and while Roman is doing fine for himself, he is nowhere near living in a mansion with all the amenities that he claimed to have.
Oh, you full of crap or what? What? Where's luxury condo? Where's sports car? Where's Barbara with big titties and Stephanie who sucks like a vacuum?
Niko, despite his current misgivings for what his cousin has regrettably become, still decides to help his old boy out. He owns a taxi business in Hove Beach, itself located in Broker, the first of the 4 main islands in the game. Our first job for Roman is chaperoning him to an underground poker game. When we get there, he gives us his old phone and tells us to call him if we see any loan sharks stumbling around. While there were phones in the previous games, the phone in this game is a much more expanded feature. We'll talk about it in a bit. And of course, the loan sharks show up, so we have to make a hasty escape, yada yada yada, you get into a car chase and then you drop Roman back off at the cab depot. Simple as that. Congratulations, you've completed 2 missions. Good luck with the other 86. Yeah, this game is just long, like really long, like just absurdly lengthy. This puts it second in the series behind San Andreas, only tailing behind it by about a dozen story missions. Anyways, though, I think I've ranted on about this game's world for long enough now. I just think it's really neat. Probably my favorite city in any of the games, although I do quite like Vice City. Let's move on to something more substantial now. Grand Theft Auto wouldn't be Grand Theft Auto without cars. Obviously, I mean, it's in the name. And also obvious by the name is the fact that you steal and drive a lot of cars. Hell, it's most of the gameplay, really. In previous titles, driving was handled in various ways, although they mostly strived for a more arcade style of handling. This is where 4 differs greatly from the rest of the series, leading to likely the most commonly criticized part of the gameplay. Driving in 4 is not necessarily more realistic as much as it is just weightier, if that makes sense. This added sense of weight leads to things feeling somewhat more realistic, but altogether the game still strives for a more arcade style of handling, just in the opposite direction. Cars handle much slower and more deliberately than in previous titles. Drifting around corners and accelerating in mere seconds are a thing of the past. Well, at least the accelerating part. Drifting is still perfectly within the realm of possibility, although due to the amount of oversteer present, it is significantly more challenging. Contrast all of this against the previous installments, and it's easy to see why this game's driving model was very controversial upon release. Let's go in order. In 3, cars are effectively handled like toys. All but the muscliest of muscle cars, the fattest of trucks, could corner at basically the same speed. Vice City was a little better. Cars were generally weightier and drifting was more difficult to pull off, and cars would have more realistic speeds and accelerations to match what they would in real life. Then you've got San Andreas, which is a mix of the two. Although in that game, you could change this by honing your skills. As you increase your driving skill, cars begin to handle with more arcade-like sensibilities. This skill, along with the entire skills system from San Andreas, is entirely gone in 4. From the moment that Nico Bellic steps off the boat, he is as skilled as he will ever be in terms of shooting, swimming, flying, and of course, driving. Again, a big reason why this is such a divisive change is because of the fact that you spend a lot of this game driving. Especially so early on, when you're light on weapons and the game will often task you with escaping pursuers rather than taking them out. With that being said though, the game offers players a wide assortment of vehicles to dick around with. Everything ranging from the tiniest ship boxes and beaters to the sexiest sports cars. There's also a wide selection of bikes to choose from, if you just need to let out your inner Sons of Anarchy. Then again, this game has a whole DLC for that. Bikes in this game are generally something that I'd try to avoid most of the time, simply because flying off of them after hitting even the slightest bump is all too prevalent, resulting in more lost health than you'd probably like. The same can happen in cars too, although not nearly as often due to the added protection of a seatbelt. I'm kidding, of course, Nico never wears a seatbelt, leading to many either comedic or intensely frustrating moments. This is all thanks to the Euphoria physics system, which I'll talk about more when we reach the combat section, as I think it's more prevalent there. Anyways though, back to vehicles. On top of ground vehicles, you also have the standard suite of a few boats. Thankfully, Nico can swim, unlike a certain other Liberty City resident. But even then, boats are used in maybe half a dozen missions across the game. Helicopters are used even less, and thank God too, since flying in these is an absolute pain in the ass. Since I'm playing on a keyboard and mouse, with a 60% keyboard on top of that, I had to control these things with WASD and IJKL. This is actually more optimal depending on how you look at it. If your keyboard has a numpad, unlike mine, you would be using that instead. Since I don't, when I first got in one of these things, I had to spend 15 minutes rebinding the keys to a configuration both myself and the game could agree on. Not a fun time. There is also a distinct lack of planes in this game though, something that has been explained away by the fact that the map is simply too small to accommodate planes. Hell, with a chopper you can easily cross the map in like 5 minutes, so a plane would probably be overkill. That, and with how heavy the choppers in this game handle, I wouldn't be surprised if they handled like shit too. With all of this being said though, driving only takes up 1/3 of the gameplay pie in this game. We still have to talk about the other fun stuff you can get up to as an enterprising businessman in Liberty City. Combat in Grand Theft Auto has always been considered one of its weakest elements. Older games generally just had shooting that was kind of okay. Wonky mouse aim on PC, and a pretty janky auto-aim system on consoles. Of the original trilogy, San Andreas had the best combat, mainly due to its new mechanics aimed at giving players better control of themselves in combat. You could aim for headshots, do free aim and lock-on aim on consoles, the whole 9 yards. But at the time of 4's inception, cover shooters like Gears of War and Uncharted were extremely popular, and thus a modern cover shooter approach was taken. The biggest thing to come out of this was the cover system itself, completely changing how the game is played. Enemies used to just stand around and shoot at you or rush you if they had a melee weapon. Now, enemies will race to cover, and combat encounters take on a very 7th gen console feel. Enemies will stick to cover like glue, and you'll probably do the same. At least until you get bored of that and you rush them with a shotgun, and 9 times out of 10 this works. Usually this only occurs in these scripted missions though, as getting into gunfights in the open world where cover is less prevalent will usually result in gunfights mirroring the scraps of old. With all of this being said though, just shooting in this game is a tremendous improvement over the previous games. In the 3D trilogy, shooting was very rigid. Guns had little to no recoil and were often pinpoint accurate. Here though, every gun kicks pretty aggressively. Granted, this is only represented by the circular crosshair changing in scale, but your spread will be affected. You do actually have to try to control the weapons in this game, as spraying and praying, especially when blind firing, can cause your weapon spread to bloom pretty heavily. So short controlled bursts with automatic weapons and tap firing semi-automatic weapons is advisable. The gun sounds, on the other hand, are sadly hit and miss. Pretty weak across the board. There are a few exceptions. The carbine rifle sounds pretty good, as it should, considering that it's probably the only weapon you're going to use for most of the late game. Explosions are also rather satisfying. But another disappointing but understandable change from San Andreas is the weapon variety. For each category of weapon, be it pistol, shotgun, SMG, so on and so forth, there are only 2 options. And in total, there are only a paltry 16 weapons compared to San Andreas' 38. And each second tier upgrade is pretty much just that, a direct upgrade of whatever you came before. Once you get the combat pistol, carbine rifle, and combat sniper, there's no reason to ever go back to their standard counterparts, besides maybe Spice of Life. Combat is generally, though, on the easier side. Even in the early game when you only have shitty weapons and little in terms of ammunition, you can still mop the floor with enemies, primarily because of how the damage system works. You see, regardless of armor or health, a headshot is almost always an instant kill with any weapon, so if you're accurate, you can get through a gunfight in seconds. This is especially easy on PC since mouse aim is precise enough to make that work out. But I've heard even with controller this is still relatively doable. That might sound like a downside, with, the combat being easy, but I find that it's all heightened by the new Euphoria physics system. You see, one of the biggest improvements made to GTA 4 was obviously graphical fidelity, but on top of that, the way that physics was handled was completely overhauled. The physics engine used here is unlike pretty much any other game around the time, primarily because of how realistic it was. When shot, enemies will realistically stagger, causing them to bump into walls or even knock over physics objects if they stumble into them. If they happen to take enough damage to take them out of the fight without killing them, they'll clutch at their wounds or lay around and reel in pain. Pretty gruesome shit, but it's hard to argue with how impressive it is for the time. Guns themselves are doled out pretty sporadically across the game. Unlike in previous games where you couldn't kick a rock without finding a high-powered rifle or rocket launcher, here you actually have to go searching for these things. All of this could be also just due to the fact that the graphical fidelity and general push towards realism has made placing random weapons around the map generally less appealing. They still exist, but they're often tucked away, even more outright secretive than in previous entries. The ammunition gun stores of old are also completely absent. This is explained away by a throwaway piece of dialogue during a mission. The mayor apparently has some kind of hard-on for gun control or whatever. So, instead, we have these underground gun stores that deal in illegal weapons. Guns aren't cheap either, at least early on. A micro SMG costs $1,200 for Christ's sake. As the game progresses, though, you amass a frankly disgusting amount of money, so ammunition and body armor costs will be a footnote in your expenses. I'm sure the eventual upkeep of 4 safe houses, and Nico's insistence on eating out will eventually put all of that in check, though. Anyways, that's Pillar 2 of this game. Let's move on to the often forgotten, but still entirely final important pillar, the rest of the world. Liberty City, and the surrounding state of Alderney, as I've previously mentioned several times by now, is a wonderfully compact, densely populated open world. They make a wonderful backdrop to this late 2000s crime drama epic, but how does it actually, feel to walk the streets? I know I kind of touched on it in my section on the city itself, but I didn't really get into what you can actually do in it, and in this chapter I am to rectify that. To start, Nico has 4, technically 5 safe houses in this game. For reasons you'll see in a bit, that 5th one doesn't last long. Unlike the 2 previous major entries in the series, these safe houses can only be unlocked by completing story missions. Nico isn't exactly the enterprising businessman that CJ or Tommy was. Despite the fact that he makes more than enough bank to afford a decent condo or even a house if he wants to live in Alderney, which is effectively the armpit of the greater Liberty City area, he still can't indulge in property sale. This goes for businesses too, so the only way you'll be getting any money is by completing missions, dabbling in side content, or by getting it the old-fashioned way. Side content in this game is pretty varied, although it is distinctly lacking in certain areas that San Andreas is pretty prevalent in. For one, the many vehicle-related job side missions that you could do in previous games are almost entirely absent, and the ones that are still here are usually tied to certain characters. For instance, after a certain point, Roman calls us up and tells us that we can do taxi missions for a little extra cash. Something that I didn't do because that's, well, boring as fuck. Of course, this is not the only character-related side mission in the game. There are others too, usually analogous of a side activity in a previous game. Take the import-export garages for an example. Instead of just finding cars and delivering them to unnamed garages, a character will contact you via email or text with a car they want you to steal and deliver to them. The better the condition, the better the pay. Speaking of emails, this game is the first in the series to implement a fully functioning online space. Early on, you can only access it by going to an internet cafe, one of the many things that ground this world firmly in the late 2000s, but eventually safe houses that you unlock will have laptops that you can use for free internet access. The internet in this game is just a fucking wild wasteland. Reflective of the time, of course, as by 2008 the internet had gone from kind of a novelty that had potential to a place where people did genuinely serious work and could have legitimate businesses. But even still though, there were remnants of that Wild West era of the early 90s internet. And also, when I say legitimate work, this game means lampoons of common website categories of the day. Dating websites, exotic car dealers, crackpot conspiracy theorist tabloids, the whole 9 yards. The game does try to make good use of the internet during its missions, but all that generally does is make missions more of a hassle. Go to an internet cafe, send a guy an email or some variation, and then wait a few days for a response so you can complete the rest of the mission. These are never really all that great, but they aren't the majority of this game's content, so it's fine. Before moving on, I suppose I should talk about the radio stations in this game, because as always, GTA radio stations are a core part of the aesthetic. All up, there are 23 different radio stations, and each one of them has a unique set of tracks, although some of them have been removed due to licensing issues. And because Rockstar hates you, you're never getting those songs back. Unless you download a mod to restore them, but you didn't hear that from me. The only station, and I mean literally the only station I listen to, is the jazz one. I don't know why, just something about driving around Liberty City at night with jazz playing, it's just a spiritual experience. I don't know how to explain it. Anyways, here's a YouTube-friendly sample of one of my favorite tracks. Anyways, besides the more structured mission-style side activities, you can also get the standard GTA fare of random shenanigans. Stunt jumps, collecting packages, shooting flying rats. You shoot birds. Yeah, very fun. Some of these can only be found at certain times of day too, so have fun trying to go for 100%. Speaking of certain times of day, this game was the first in the series to introduce the now iconic Strangers and Freaks missions, which are now a much beloved part of the series. They are usually short, almost anecdotal side missions given by a random minor side character. Some of these characters even appear multiple times too. These can range from just a cutscene to drive X person to Y place or shoot all these guys. Again, nothing super crazy, but these are pretty amusing sometimes. Either way, that's the bulk of the game's side content out of the way. Generally, there is less to do than San Andreas, but I personally think that game went just comically overboard with the shit you had to do to complete the game. Collecting seashells, horseshoes, spraying tags, doing all the import-export garages, completing all the vehicle schools, eventually it just reaches a point where it's way too much. There is one last thing that I forgot to mention earlier though, which is hanging out with friends. At a certain point in the storyline, characters you've worked with will become Nico's friend, which is really just a fancy way of saying that they'll constantly bug you and go do shit with them. Go get food, do an activity like playing pool or darts, get drunk, and while that sounds all fun and good, it can get a bit tedious. The game does try to damper this though, with rewarding the player with certain special abilities for completing these outings. Befriending a character to a certain point will give you access to their special ability. For instance, befriending Roman will give you the ability to call up a taxi anywhere you like, free of charge. Not a bad deal, although I basically never used it. Other abilities though are more useful, but for the sake of spoilers, we'll have to save that for the, well, spoilers section of the video. And speaking of spoilers, that part starts now. If you have any intent to go and play this game, now is your chance to go and do that. Personally, I think it is one of Rockstar's finest works to date, right next to Max Payne 3 and Red Dead Redemption. Even if you're just the casual GTA enjoyer, a playthrough of this one is well worth the price of admission. Now let's pick up where we left off. For the sake of my own sanity, for the rest of this video, I'll be following this flowchart that you can find in the GTA Wiki. It goes through basically every mission in the order that the developers probably intended, or at least the most logical order. You can complete any unlocked mission you like in any order you like, but for the sake of my own sanity, I figured this would be an easier way to go through them in this video. Primarily because I completed them in any random order I wanted during my actual playthrough, and I didn't feel like sifting through 40 hours of footage to go and find the right video. The right mission. What the fuck am I talking? So if you see Nico's outfit change 50,000 times between missions, that's why. Anyways, where we last left off, we helped Roman out with his little loan shark business. In that cutscene, there were two important characters that I decided to not mention for the sake of brevity. Mallory, who is Roman's girlfriend and a major person of importance as the story goes on, and Vlad, who's a Russian mob asshole. And Roman owes him money or something, I don't care, he's just a prick. We'll be getting to know him more shortly. When we return to the cab depot for our next mission, Roman is getting assailed by two morons, one of which is trying to threaten Nico, which doesn't go very well. After that, they leave, and Roman tasks us with picking up Mallory and one of her friends from the train station because he's too fat and lazy to do something. I don't know. Point is, we drive there, get the girls, and then drop them back off at Michelle's place. Oh yeah, the other girl is Michelle. We'll get to know her soon too, because Mallory practically strong-arms us into going onto a date with her. And when I said strong-armed, I meant that. The first date with Michelle is a required story mission. And really it's just an excuse to explain how you can hang out with friends and how clothing stores work. But on our way over to her place, we're called up by Roman, who's getting beat up by the two goons from the previous mission. This gives us the choice of either going on our date or going and saving our cousin. The obviously correct choice is going and helping Roman, so I decided to do that first. This mission introduces us to unarmed combat, which is, well, just get a good look at it now, because after this mission, I literally never fought anyone with hand-to-hand combat again. It is substantially better than in previous games, mainly because regardless of what kind of controller you're using, you have a pretty robust lock-on of the target when you're fighting, which does definitely help. but it's still not useful enough to pursue ever using again. The mission ends after we chase this guy down and get into a one-sided knife fight and win, even if calling it a fight is kind of a rich term. Our next mission for Roman is a pretty inconsequential one. Well, kind of inconsequential, because it does introduce us to the new police and wanted mechanics in GTA 4. Unlike in previous games where the only reliable ways to clear a wanted level were to either find police bribes or go to the pay and spray, here you can actually outrun the police with a proper chase. When you get a wanted level, a certain portion of your minimap will start flashing where the police spotted you. If you can manage to escape the search area and avoid all police attention for long enough, you can drop your wanted level. Simple as that. This is only really a viable strategy for low levels though. As past about level 4, the search area becomes so big that it's almost impossible to escape, and then you'll actually have to use the pay and spray. Luckily though, the game never forces you to hide out from a 4-star wanted level on a mission, so it's not a huge problem unless you go down on rampages regularly. Anyways, the next mission for Roman is actually important. 1, because we meet little Jacob, absolute Rasta legend and a future homie for Nico. And 2, this is our first chance to get our hands on a gun. Like I said earlier on my section about combat, the shooting in this game is pretty easy, especially on mouse and keyboard, so keeping Jacob alive here is no problem. After this, Jacob hits us up and says that he has some work for us, in which he gives us another combat-heavy mission. This one involves us storming a townhouse packed full of gang members, one of which having a shotgun, but besides that it's a pretty inconsequential job. Around this point, Vlad will hit us up over the phone and tell us to meet him at his bar for some forced work. Vlad is an asshole, but since he's kinda got Roman by the balls, we have to work for him. His first mission has us driving to a business that owes him protection money, and the owner wants none of his shit. Honestly, a smart move, but unfortunately he forgot to cinder block proof his windows, so now he's gotta pay up. Second mission is another protection racket scheme, although this one is just a car chase with added vehicular Mad Maxing for some fun. His third mission is more of the same, although instead of being the guy who does the chasing, we're getting chased. Although that does kind of prove to be a bit futile for the other guy. The car that we're stealing happens to be fucking filthy, so Vlad makes us take it to the car wash before we deliver it to him. Car washes are one of those things that are only really there for the sake of immersion, because washing a car that you stole 5 minutes ago and will lose again in another 5 minutes seems kind of pointless. Unlike in previous games where you can have garages to store all of the fancy cars you have, in 4 you get a parking spot outside of each of the safe houses for 1, maybe 2 small cars. Our final regular job for Vlad is actually pretty unique. It's another car chase, although this time we have to chase the guy on foot through a construction site, which ends when he Looney Tunes himself off this catwalk. This presents us with one of the seldom used mechanics in this game, where certain characters can either be spared or killed depending on player choice. Very few of these have any kind of serious weight, and this one is no different, although sparing Ivan does give us a random encounter later in the game. That, and considering the fact that Ivan is hated by Vlad, he can't really be that bad of a guy. I know I've kind of bulldozed through Vlad's missions here, but that's because this next mission here is where he fucking dies. By our hand, of course. Roman finally puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that Vlad has been porking Mallory, and is distraught, which is honestly understandable. Nico hints towards the fact that he has had suspicions, and Roman calls him an asshole, to which Nico steps back and finally decides to do something about it. We drive over to Vlad's usual haunt, and he runs off like a pussy, to which we give chase. We chase him all the way down to the docks where he finally crashes and we can confront him. On certain characters in the game, we can perform unique execution moves if we have a pistol equipped, Vlad being one of them.
Revenge! Half Beach is a small place. My friends will find you.
You were the stupid one, Vladdy boy. Nobody fucks with my family.
After we kill Vlad, Nico finally decides to spill why he came to the States. It wasn't just for Roman, although that was definitely a driving factor too. No, the real reason revolves around something that happened to him during his service back in the old country. During a mission he was ambushed, and 12 of the 15 men in his unit were killed. Nico and 2 other survivors were the only ones that made it. Nico has deduced that it was an inside job and has vowed to find the killer ever since. One of the 3 surviving members lives here, so he figured moving in with Roman would be an easier way to get close to his target. Roman is beside himself at this point, not just because Nico finally decided to vent about why he's here on a fucking revenge plot, but because with Vlad dead by their hands, now the entire Russian mob is going to be after them. Specifically a man named Mikhail Faustin, who we'll be meeting very shortly, or right now actually.
Get out of the dumpster, Mr. Fatman!
We're kidnapped and held at gunpoint and eventually sawpoint by these 2 Russian mooks, and just as this guy is about to make Nico's head disappear, Faustin walks downstairs.
Good lord. What are you doing?
He's not exactly pleased with his employees' work here, and with some profound bullshitting on Nico's part, we're able to walk free. This guy, not so much. Anyways, we are forced again into working for the Russians, this time with Roman's life hanging in the balance. The next mission is pretty boring, just steal a cop car and chase down some vans to find the one with TVs in it. Pretty inconsequential. When we are done, Dmitry Raskolov, the other guy who was in the basement with us, calls us up and tells us that Roman is fine, although he's going to be out of commission for a while. During our first proper mission for Faustin, he shows off how much of a basket case he is. In this working relationship, Dmitry is the one who keeps a level head, while Faustin is the crazy mob boss who can fly off the rails at any moment. Even then, Dmitry is still an asshole and a hypocrite, since the only reason he's even a little calm is because he's popping pills like Max Payne. Anyways, the actual mission premise is for us to go to a sex shop with Dmitry for protection money. A little intimidating here, and one murder there, and eventually everything goes back to plan. And as a reward for doing such a nice job, Dmitry takes us to the Liberty City Gun Club and lets us pick out a new toy. Our next mission is a little meatier in terms of gameplay. Faustin wants us to kill Kenny Petrovic, the son of another major Russian mob family here in Liberty City. Dmitry attempts to dissuade Faustin from doing this, but he is insistent, and so we do what he says. This one tasks us with heading down to the train station and killing him as soon as he gets off the train. With him dead, Faustin and Dmitry are now in some hot shit, but that's not really of concern to us. At least not yet anyways. Faustin's next job tasks us with killing his daughter's new biker boyfriend, who is part of the Lost MC, one of 2 or 3 major motorcycle clubs in Liberty City. In one of the expansion packs, we play as one of these guys. Anyways, the mission itself is pretty bog standard. Another chase and a murder attached free of charge, only this time it's a bike chase instead of a car chase. Our final mission for Faustin starts with an actually insightful cutscene between Nico and Faustin's wife. Nico reflects a bit on his time in the war, talking about some of the horrible things he did. But of course, this moment of introspection is cut short when Faustin bubbles in and knocks everything around like the Russian buffoon he is. Anyways, he wants us to drive this truck of explosives to a garage run by another mob family. Nico doesn't know the truck is rigged until he gets behind the wheel and Faustin tells him, which makes the drive out there all the more tense. Since not only do we have to cross the toll bridge, but because Roman calls us up mid-drive.
Nico and Roman, we should go and get drunk together.
Roman, I'm nervous enough about driving a truck full of explosives around the city for Mikhail Faust. He's out of control. Anyway, I'm sorry, but if I get drunk with you and then drive this thing, I'll definitely blow myself up. I'll catch you later, cousin.
There are several scripted phone calls like this, and thankfully none of them actually pause the mission at hand and force you to hang out with the person that calls you. Anyways, with Faustin's last mission done, I figure we ought to take a break from tedious mob work and do some more lighthearted favors, like stalking and killing a drug dealer. Little Jacob and his associate Badman want us to take out a rival dealer who's been pushing on their turf. Sounds easy enough, but Badman wants us to follow the guy on foot to his place so we can take out all of his friends. Thankfully, failing to stalk the guy quietly doesn't instantly fail the mission, only forcing us to run after him instead. When we do catch up to him in his apartment, the mission is basically over. Just kill him and his friends and get out of there. The next mission is one for Roman, although calling it a mission is kind of a stretch. We meet him at the cab depot and we're introduced to one of his friends named Brucey, whom he met online. Brucey is your typical gym rat, roid-raged, crazy person who is obsessed with living that influencer lifestyle you see on all the social media platforms nowadays. Only Brucey was doing it before it was cool. He can be a bit much at times, but he's not overly malicious or anything, so he's probably fine. Anyways, this mission is really just an excuse for us to go to the internet cafe and log on. This is when we unlock the special import-export missions, as Brucey will email us with any cars he wants delivered, which actually gives us an incentive to check our email. Brucey also has some more conventional work for us too. His first gig tasks us with getting a cop car, which can now be done simply by calling 911 and phoning for the cops. With the cop car secured, he asks us to use the police computer to search for a specific person, who we need to track down and kill. Pretty simple mission, but the big thing that we can get out of this is the ability to do vigilante work for the cops. This is effectively the evolution of the vigilante work from the previous games. Instead of the game giving us a random target though, here you can go through a set of structured targets called Most Wanted. You do also have the ability to do random targets just as before, but the Most Wanted side activity is the real draw here. Brucey's next mission is a car theft. Sounds pretty simple, even as easy as can be. Get it? Anyways, the title is bullshit, and after we get the car, we are relentlessly accosted by cars full of goons until we reach his garage. Hell, we barely make it back in one piece, but hey, at least Brucey pays well. Anyways, I think I'm done putting off the hard stuff, let's just go talk with Dmitry. He tells us that Faustin's antics have gotten them in some serious shit with the Petrovic mob, and that after much negotiation, the only way to get them out of this hot water is to kill Faustin. However, he's arranged for the only way for us to get out of the deal is if we ourselves do the deed. So that's just what we do. We arrive at the club to find that Faustin is already aware of our ploy and ready for action. He weasels his way out of our grasp and we give chase. This mission has some pretty intense combat, so the body armor that Dmitry left us will actually do some good. After fighting our way up to the roof of the club, we can find Faustin standing alone. We ice him in another execution, and the mission ends. Dimitri tells us to meet him at an abandoned warehouse, to which Nico is immediately suspicious. There wasn't any other payment discussed, so this is pretty much 99% chance going to be a trap. Nico calls up Jacob, who has by now become a proper homie, and requests some backup, and so he meets us there and keeps an eye out for us. Good thing, too, since Dimitri was obviously planning on killing us, evidenced by him inviting one Ray Bulgarin to the scene. Bulgarin is someone who Nico worked for previously. Trafficking humans until a botched job cost Bulgarin a lot of money. He believes that Nico owes him, and at his bequest, Dimitri orders his men to kill us. Jacob comes in to assist us in our darkest hour, and this leads to the most combat-filled mission in the game so far. They throw dozens of goons at us, but there is still plenty of body armor and health to throw around, so it's not a huge deal. After escaping the warehouse and eventually the cops, we drop Jacob back at his place and the mission ends. After this, Roman calls us up and tells us to meet him in some remote alleyway in Broker. He's been receiving threatening phone calls, so he's paranoid that something bad is going to happen. Nico informs him of his misdeeds with Bulgarin and Dimitri, to which Roman freaks out even more and says that they need to pack their things and flee Broker. We hop into his car and drive over to the safe house to pack our things, only to find it lit ablaze by Dimitri's men. Roman frantically tries to run inside to grab something, but Nico stops him.
Leave it, cousin. This place is gone.
After that, we decide to head to Roman's cab depot instead to find it in much the same state. Guess that means no more free taxis for us. After that, Roman is practically beside himself. He calls up Mallory and asks if they have a place for us to crash for a while, and thankfully she does. The main reason why Roman is so especially indisposed by this is because he had a special diamond ring for Mallory in the apartment, as he wanted to propose to her. I don't often get mushy when playing games, and even fully well knowing that this scene was coming up, having played this game all the way through before, just fuck me, man. It's all carried by the vocal performances here. All of the voice acting in this game is phenomenal, but especially here with Roman's voice acting, he just carries this scene. When we arrive at the new place in Bohan, we find that it's just as mediocre as our previous lodgings, even worse in some areas, but it's a roof over our heads, so that has to count for something. In the middle of Roman and Nico arguing, Mallory walks in to check on Roman. She also tells us to meet her at the community center, as she can set us up with someone who may have some more work for us. And with that, we've ended part 1 of GTA 4's story. From here on out, our ascent up the criminal ladder of Liberty City is only going to get more ridiculous. Before we get too entrenched in the work in Bohan, there's one more job that we can tackle for Brucey that is required for the story. This one is actually a 2-part job, which means that this cutscene at the beginning is really just for the setup purposes. But the long and the short of it is that Brucey wants us to take out some guy, and the only way we can coax him out of hiding is by inviting him on a date. Insert some mid-2000s lame homophobia adjacent joke here, I don't really care. Regardless, we need to head down to an internet cafe, go to the Love Meet website, and email one French Tom. After a few days, you meet the guy to diner and kill him. Simple as that. This mission is really only a tutorial for the use of the Love Meet website, since that is something that you can actually use. Nico can't actually date men, though. That's entirely fabricated for this mission. There are only 2 actual girlfriends that Nico can have, and both of which come with their own unique bonuses for getting their affection up. Anyways, though, when I said required job, I meant it, because there's one more job for Bruce that is entirely optional. It's a street race, which really only serves to introduce the player to the street racing side activity, which becomes accessible after this mission. We do get a pretty sweet ride out of it, though, even if it looks really goofy sitting outside my crummy apartment. Either way, our first job in Bohan is for a guy named Manny Escuela, who works down at the community center. Manny is one of those faux philanthropist types that acts like they're doing a lot of good when they're really they just kind of don't. He claims he's cleaning up the streets when really all he's doing is paying people like Nico to kill a dozen drug dealers. And spoilers, that's what his first mission is about. It's a more traditional GTA-styled cartailing mission followed by a decently satisfying shootout inside of this warehouse. After we leave the warehouse, Manny tries to act like we just saved the fucking neighborhood from a drug epidemic. He's an asshole, but he's a generally harmless asshole. Anyways, his next mission for us is much the same. Drive to the place, kill the dealers, although this one starts with him chatting up LCPD Deputy Chief Commissioner Francis McCreary, a character who will be very, very important in the coming missions. After these 2 jobs for Manny, Mallory tells us that she's got another contact for us, who will have some more conventional criminal for us to tackle, so to speak. Elizabeta Torres, who is a well-to-do drug dealer. Exactly the kind of work we've been pushing into the dirt for the last 2 missions. Not important, really. She wants us to chaperone one of her boys, Patrick McCreary, who, yes, is related to the guy we just talked about, to a drug deal. She suspects some shit is gonna go down, and to that end she's proven right when we have to protect her boys with sniper fire. Besides just giving us the sniper rifle, this mission is kinda boring. Her next mission, though, is of pretty good substance. Elizabeta introduces us to Johnny Klebitz, a character of minor importance on this game, but the main character of the Lost and Damned expansion. She tells us that he's been sitting on a pretty sizable stash of heroin, and that she's organized a buyer and, well, I think you can see where this is going. chaperone Johnny and Playboy X, who we'll be getting to know more in a bit, to the deal and safely escort them out once the shit hits the fan. Or should I say escort Playboy out, because once the buyers reveal themselves to be members of the LCPD, Johnny runs off and leaves us to fend for ourselves. This shootout is pretty intense, having us run across rooftops until we get back down to the streets where we have to escape a 2-star wanted level. Once we lose the heat, we can drop Playboy back at his condo in the newly unlocked island of Algonquin. He says he'll hit us up if he has any work for us, which in GTA terms means he'll be a mission giver very soon. Around this time, we'll get a text from an unknown number telling us to meet them at a pier south of Algonquin. When we arrive, we can find Francis McCreary of all people waiting there for us. The long and the short of it is that he has dirt on us working for the Russian mob, and in exchange for a few favors, he'll keep hush-hush. Okay, fine, whatever, since at the very least we can still strong-arm him into paying us a good rate. His first mission is kind of mechanically interesting. We have to go to a park to meet a supposed informant who's been blackmailing him. Because, yeah, if you couldn't tell, he's a corrupt cop. I know, shocking, a corrupt cop in a Grand Theft Auto game, but I digress. Instead of Francis going and sticking his neck out of cover, we go there in his place, and call the guy to discern who he really is. I didn't get it right the first time, but since the guy never gets up to leave, it doesn't matter and I was just able to walk down and shoot him, ending the mission. Before I get too entrenched in doing dirty police work, I figure it's time we return to Manny to tie up our loose ends with him. His final job is a car chase, or more accurately a train chase. Well, it's kind of a car chase since we're in a car. Okay, it's supposed to be a play on that super famous scene from The French Connection. Hell, the mission is even called The Puerto Rican Connection. Besides the train stuff, this mission is pretty boring. Follow the damn train and kill the guy when he gets off. Since we're here and Elizabetha's apartment is in the same complex as Manny's community center, I figure we should see her for some more work too. When we enter, we can find that she's busy chewing out our boy Jacob. In short, Jacob lost the bag, in this case being a ton of coke, by giving her a faulty contact. Kind of a shit move, but it's whatever. I mean, how hard could it possibly be to get it back? Very hard, in fact, as this mission can be a serious spike in difficulty for the unprepared. The coke is being held in an abandoned asylum by 2 different gangs, both of which are heavily armed and dug into the joint like a tick. We have to fight tooth and nail to get the stuff back, and once we do, news teams, the LCPD equivalent of a SWAT team, storm the place and we have to escape a 3-star wanted level, the highest the game has ever made us escape in a mission so far. Once we do, Jacob calls us up and tells them to meet him in some back alley in Bohan. He sounds pretty spooked, so he must be in some deep shit.
Jacob, what are you talking about? You know, I think you're smoking too much.
Yo, me think me know the eater come from in a king.
Hey, Nico. Hey, Jacob.
What are you doing here? This is no place for you, Michelle.
As it happens, it is.
And of course, because things just can't possibly go right, Michelle, yeah, remember her, nice girl, was actually working for the government the whole time. This should be something that is no surprise for even the mildly informed, since it's been hinted at pretty heavily. But still, this is news to Nico, and he's forced to give up the coke that we just spent 20 minutes collecting. This puts Elizabetha in shambles, as by the next time we see her, she's gone fully off the deep end. She's paranoid that everyone is a rat, and Manny barging in to try and bust her certainly doesn't help.
Okay, hold on.
Alright, man. This is what Manny's all about, man.
Manny.
Now, word up, bitch. You better stop slinging that shit on my streets, yo. We don't want it anymore. Hey, OJ, you catching this?
Rolling.
This, Manny, for fuck's
The
sake.
streets have spoken. Now leave my people alone. Yo, Nico, what are you doing here?
I mean, yeah, he was an asshole, but I don't think that was really necessary. You know what, it's whatever. I'm sure the black market organ dealers will have a field day with this one. Okay, with that all out of the way, I suppose it's time to go back to work for Francis. Next time we meet him in his office in Algonquin, he tells us that some lawyer prick has dirt on him that could possibly send him to court. So we have to do the deed and, you know, take care of business. The problem is he's a lawyer, for a respected firm at that, so walking in the front door and killing the guy isn't exactly an option. So we have to get him alone, and the best way of doing that would be to set up an interview for his firm. One falsified resume later and the deal is done. But the interview doesn't happen until the next day, so we'll have plenty of time to head down to Perseus, grab ourselves a nice suit, since we'll need her for the interview. Once we get inside, we can kill him right away, preferably with a melee weapon, since doing so with a gun will get you a pretty spicy wanted level. After he's dead, just grab the files and deliver them to McCreary. His next job is another chase and kill situation, but this time we're given the choice to spare or kill the guy. If you choose to spare him, he can become another random encounter later in the game, but he's entirely inconsequential. The rest of his goons, however, aren't, because apparently we didn't do a good enough job dealing with all of them, as one of his chief lieutenants is threatening to squeal, so we have to go and kill him next. This is another actually pretty unique mission. We can't immediately see the guy in his apartment, so we need to get creative. Normally, you're supposed to be able to see his phone number on the landline here, But since I set my camera FOV high with one of those mods that I had installed, I couldn't see it, which means I actually had to go into the settings and lower my FOV for this one mission. Some weird fucking jank for sure, but after that it's just a matter of calling him and dinking him in the back of the head with a sniper rifle. That's all of Francis's missions for now, as there's one very important one we can only unlock later on in the game. For now, let's go and work with Playboy, who has some work for us finally. We meet him at his penthouse, where we're introduced to one of his old associates, Dwayne Forge. Dwayne is kinda like Playboy's mentor, who taught him the ropes back in the old days, but he got locked up ages ago and just recently got out. He also doesn't take too kindly to the fact that Playboy has not only taken over all of his businesses, but is also living in his house. We'll be getting to know him more later, but for right now, Playboy and Nico leave to discuss business. He has grand ambitions, one of which is to become a property developer, the likes of Yusuf Amir, whom Playboy is attempting to suck up to with this job. Basically, we need to go to a construction site and eliminate a bunch of Mafia-associated union members. Sounds easy enough, but expect a very warm welcome. Before we can even get into the place, we need to take out 3 sniper sentries overlooking the yard. And even then, this is still one of the toughest combat-focused missions in the game so far. Playboy does supply us with plenty of tools though, like the assault rifle and plenty of grenades, and we're paid handsomely for our work too. His next mission is pretty boring though, although it does net us with a new phone. Really, the whole point of this mission is to acquaint us with our new phone, and the camera feature that it has. We need to drive to the place, take a picture of the guy, and send it to Playboy so he can ID the dude we need to kill. Pretty straightforward. We can't only send photos though, as we can receive them too, like in this mission where we're sent a picture of Roman's bloodied and beaten ass by Dimitri. Oh Roman, how have you gotten yourself in this sticky situation now? Coincidentally, in my playthrough while I did all of these missions out of order, this event happened while I was driving to the interview for Francis. So that was fun. This mission really just amounts to another big combat gauntlet. Fight to the top, save Roman, and drive back to the safe house in Bohan. Roman got himself in this situation because he's been dealing with too much online gambling, one of his favorite vices as we've seen. Nico lays everything out for him and tells him that they need to get out of Bohan before Dimitri comes and burns another one of their safe houses. All that Roman gets out of this though is an excuse to go and buy a plush condo near Middle Park, complete with a large parking spot and a working laptop to let us access the internet freely. Anyways, remember Michelle, the lady who turned out to be a federal informant, and also our previous girlfriend? Yeah, that second part isn't even nearly as important, but I digress. She calls us up and tells us to meet her somewhere, and when we do, she introduces us to this guy. He doesn't have a name, but the long and the short of it is that he works for the GTA equivalent of the CIA through the UL paper as a front. And he has some pretty nasty details on us. And in exchange for dealing with the government wet work, he'll not only agree to keep our details hidden, but also help us find the guy we've been looking for. Easier said than done, since this is miserable CIA work. A lot of wanton murder and destruction, although his jobs don't really pick up steam until his third mission, Dust Off, where we're contracted to go and steal a helicopter. This is the mission I talked about way earlier on in the video, where I had to rebind all of my flying controls so that I could actually beat it, because you know they defaulted to a numpad I still don't fucking have. Either way, this mission is more of a setup mission for our next job for the paper, which is Mr. Paperman's final job for the time being. This one tasks us with picking up the same chopper, now accompanied by homie little Jacob, and blowing up another chopper out of the sky. Nico does the flying while Jacob does the shooting. This mission's difficulty is almost entirely dictated by Jacob's ability to fire a rocket launcher. And thankfully, during my playthrough, he was sober enough to fire the thing properly, only taking 3 shots to down the chopper. After that piece of work, the paper tells us that we're off the hook, and that they'll keep in touch with any information about our man. In the meantime, let's check up on Patrick, who's contacted us shortly after we reached Algonquin. He still lives with his mother and Broker, with his 25 siblings because, you know, he's Irish and he has 25 siblings. Except for Francis, but that's understandable because he's an asshole. Anyways, basically all of these characters, besides his mother, are incredibly important to the story moving forward. But the only new one we're meeting now is Kate, Patrick's sister. The game tries really hard to set her up as Nico's main love interest, but unless you care about actually going out on dates with her, she serves very little purpose in the story besides being the occasional voice of reason for Nico. This factor is one of the biggest criticisms I have with this game's ending, although we'll talk about that later. Anyways, our first job with Patrick is pretty straightforward. Head out to a fishing warehouse, kill all of the triads, and drive this truck full of pharmaceuticals back to a garage owned by Ray Bacino, Patrick's contact in the Pegrino crime family. He's distrustful of him, but the pay seems to be pretty good, so it's not a bad deal. His second mission is more of the same. Team up with Patrick and the boys, and drive over to some warehouse on the water, and kill a bunch of guys. And then drive away, this time by boat. I think this is the first mission in the game where using a boat is required, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, I've sped past Patrick's last 2 missions because his final mission is one of the best, if not the best in the game. Beforehand, he tells us to swing by Perseus to grab a nice suit for a big job he's been planning. That big job is, of course, 3-leaf clover, or in other words, this game's take on a bank robbery. But not just any bank job. Nuh-uh, we're robbing the Bank of Liberty, the biggest hit in town. We'll be accompanied by Derek, Patrick's deadbeat drug and alcohol-addicted brother, and his friend Michael, who's accompanied us on our previous outing. Also at the pregame is Jerry, Patrick's older brother. We'll get to know him and Derek more soon, but I wouldn't get too attached to Michael. The drive there serves as a layout of our plan. We barge in, take hostages, while Derek heads down to the vault and plants a bomb. Once the bomb goes off, Michael and Nico head down there and grab all the money, and then we escape. Sounds pretty simple on paper, but of course, things go terribly wrong. Derek and Patrick get into a verbal argument about some stupid bullshit, giving a perfect window of opportunity for this wannabe hero to get up and shoot Michael. This just leaves Nico to grab the cash. And once we get back from the vault, we find the place is being swarmed by the cops. This being the only mission in the game to give the player a 5-star wanted level, although this has obviously been pared down significantly for the purposes of scripting. Even then, the rest of this mission is just one absolute brawl through the streets of Liberty City. Our only goal is to shake the heat, which is easier said than done, seeing that we have to take the subway to actually lose our wanted level. Oh, and when I said take the subway, I meant we'll be doing that the hard way. Once we emerge from the subway tunnels, our 5-star wanted level has whittled down to a 3-star wanted level, making the escape a little bit more plausible. And after a pretty intense game of cat and mouse through the streets of Liberty City, we can drive back to the safe house and drop the brothers off, who leave us with our share of $250,000. The highest amount of money given to us by any mission in the game. This also finally unlocks the island of Alderney. From here on out, the mission summaries are going to get a lot more brief, primarily because of the fact that many of the missions moving forward can be summarized in actually one sentence. Drive here, shoot this guy, rinse and repeat. What I'm trying to say here is that things are going to be speeding up from here until practically the end of the game, so bear with me here. Before we start our work in Alderney, we have quite a few loose ends to tie up. First of which being Dwayne Forge, the guy we met back at Playboy's apartment. Anyway, since he's been out of the joint, his life has been in shambles, which has generally led him to not feeling so good, which is, understandable. Nico, seeing more of himself in Dwayne than he'd probably like to admit, agrees to help him out free of charge. When he went into the joint, his girlfriend took everything from him, and now she's hanging out with some random dude. Dwayne wants us to get the job done, but since I'm not too keen on killing this random lady, I decide to take out her boyfriend instead, collecting the money that Dwayne was owed. His second job is far more substantial. We need to go to a club that he originally owned and take care of the upper management. The unique thing about this mission, though, is the fact that it doesn't point out where the managers are on the map, meaning that we actually have to listen into conversations to find out where they are. I actually failed this one once, mainly because of the fact that I died in the preceding gunfight and I was scrambling to kill the last target before he left the building. Once the job is done, though, Playboy will call us up later and tell us that he was a very important investor in the club, souring our relations. At this point, tensions are pretty high between Playboy and Dwayne, and we meet Playboy at his penthouse for a sit-down. Long and the short of it, he wants us to kill Dwayne, just straight up. He'll pay us a hefty chunk of change for the deed, and Nico is understandably hesitant, leaving saying he'll think about it. Shortly after, Dwayne will call us up and tell us to kill Playboy instead, leading to one of the very few important missions in the game. Killing either of the two men will result in very different outcomes, but really only one of them makes sense, because why would you ever kill Dwayne? Firstly, it makes no sense, and second, Playboy will only give you 25 grand and tell you to fuck off afterwards, making this outcome just a giant slap in the face. Killing Playboy not only makes sense, mainly because he's an asshole, but it also gives you a far better reward. Not only do you get the ability to hang out with Dwayne as a friend character, but you also get Playboy's condo, the nicest safe house in the game by a wide margin. It's got a penthouse view with a fancy balcony, and access to a special outfit that looks like Claude's fit from GTA 3. And as one of the 5 currently alive people who actually like that game, I appreciate that. So, Playboy has to go. He takes no time at all in assuming that we're there to kill him, which is pretty apt, but still, the guy's pretty paranoid. He makes a run for it, although due to some miraculous act of God, I managed to take this 5-story fall unscathed, allowing me to catch up with him with his pants down and ice him. As a thank you, Dwayne leaves us with the apartment and tells us to keep in touch. With that little arc tied up with a nice bow on it, I figure now is a good time to go work for the mob. Patrick's Italian mafia contract, Ray Bacino, hit us up some time ago and tells us to meet him for some work, which we do. Ray is kind of an asshole, but not enough of one to make working for him entirely impossible. At least not yet, anyways. He doesn't exactly trust us right now, so he wants us to do him a little favor. That favor turns out to be killing this guy who's packed into a building with 40 goons. Anyways, with that bit of unpleasantness out of the way, we can move on to Ray's main arc, which I will call the Diamond Arc. And oh boy, this one sucks. The Diamond Arc spans from now until almost the end of the game. To summarize like the next 5 missions for this guy, including a bunch of missions for other characters too, We chase around these stupid fucking diamonds, and in the end, nobody even gets them. Not Nico, not Luis, not Johnny, no one. All this amounts to is a literal dead end. And sure, whatever, you could make the point that this is some kind of greater thing about crime not paying, but still. By the end of this mission chain, all you feel is just disappointed in everything. But either way, Ray's next few missions go a little something like this. Ray tells us about the diamond ploy, telling us that he's been using trash men to carry the diamonds discreetly. We help the trash men out, only for them to double-cross Ray, leading to us now having to kill them and bring the diamonds back. He then sets up a deal with some Jewish mafia guys, telling us to bring the diamonds to the Libertonian Museum. We're assisted by Johnny again, and again, just like the last time, he places out once we get under fire. Luis, the protagonist of the Ballad of Gay Tony, the other GTA 4 expansion, shows up and busts the deal, killing the Jewish mafia goons and leaving us to fend for ourselves. And now we're really SOL. We have to fight tooth and nail to get out of this museum, with an admittedly pretty enjoyable fight, but we leave entirely empty-handed. And now Ray is double pissed, both at the Lost MC and at us, but mostly at the Lost Motorcycle Club, whose vice president left us in the dust back there in the deal. So now he wants us to go and kill two of those guys, leading to one of my least favorite chases in the game. The locales are very cool, don't get me wrong. Having a motorcycle chase through the subway tunnels while trains are actively swerving by is raw as fuck. But the fact of the matter is that this fat biker schmuck can soak up like 500 rounds to the back, which is it just doesn't make any sense. He's scripted to only be killable at the very end of the chase, once we leave the tunnels, which is just dumb. A lot of the other car chases in this game are like that too, but this one is just especially stupid. Anyways, that's all of Ray's work for now. Happening in parallel, though, is a bunch of side shit pertaining to the McCreary mob. Also about the diamonds, but we'll get there when we get there. First up is Jerry, who has beef with the Albanians for some fucking reason. Also, yes, Jerry is a racist and an asshole, so fuck him. Anyways, go blow up this guy's car. Yes, I do work for the Irish mob. How could you tell? His next mission is named just such a pained Terminator 2 reference to the point where I'm not even going to repeat it, and it is exactly as simple as it sounds. We need to dress up like an Albanian gang member and kill one of the Ancelotti family capos in an attempt to start a gang war between the two families. Jerry provides us with the outfit for the job. While he may be racist, he is a cannibal, so, at least we can take solace in the fact that he thinks that we all at least taste the same. That was a stupid fucking... I'm just gonna cut that. Anyways, the mission itself is fucking boring and doesn't really amount to anything. Shocking. Although we do get to keep this cool jacket, which is a nice touch. Either way, we won't be seeing Jerry for quite a while, since after this mission he gets locked up, so yeah, that's honestly pretty deserved. With our work for Jerry taken care of, we can move over to the one and only McCreary brother we haven't helped out yet, Derek. He's drunkenly stupering around at a park in Alderney, which isn't exactly the best sign of him being all there. Hell, Derek is one of the few characters that Nico is outwardly afraid of, if only just because he's such a loose cannon. Anyways, his first job is pretty simple. Get a cop car, find a dude, and chase him back to his safe house so you can clean out him and the rest of his cronies. Really, this mission is just an excuse to get you to explore Alderney a bit more, since it's likely the first job you'll do when you get here. His next mission is a lot more hands-on, though. He wants our help in defending a Korean boat coming to the city, fittingly carrying a boatload of drugs. Problem is, the Albanians we pissed off 2 missions ago are hot on our tail, resulting in a pretty lackluster boat chase, followed by us having to shoot down a helicopter. This is the first time we get our hands on a rocket launcher in this game too, so that's fun. But in the end, surprisingly, everything goes smoothly, and the boat makes it safely to port, and we walk away with our cut. Derek's final mission is another one that's actually really cool. The setup is pretty straightforward. Some guy that he used to run with is trying to squeal, and now I need to shut him up. Problem being that the only time to get at him is when he's being transported via police convoy. But there is one small silver lining though, that being that the convoy is set to head through the Booth Tunnel. His plan, well really Patrick's plan, but I digress, is to get a truck to block the tunnel, forcing the trucks to stop and leaving them vulnerable for Patrick and Nico to hit them. And what results is a pretty nasty shootout. Rockets fired, plenty of cops dead, the usual fare by now. Once we're in the truck, we need to lose the heat, which means we can't be rolling around in this police truck for too long. So we ditch the truck in favor of a drop car left by Derek. The dialogue in this mission is pretty great too, might I add. Aiden, the guy we were sent out here to kill, thinks he's getting rescued. Meanwhile, Patrick is trying very hard not to tell the guy we're gonna kill him. Eventually, we do reach the drop-off point, and drop-off in this case being drop off the face of the earth. But I digress. Anyways, with all of Derek's work done, we have completed our fares to the McCreary brothers for now. Or not, really. Francis, of all people, calls us up to tell us to meet him somewhere. He's pissed that we've been working for his brothers, especially Derek, who he really doesn't like. And apparently Derek is going to squeal to the press about Francis's corruption. And he wants us to kill him. Of course, this is a very, very big deal, so we decide to think about it. Derek calls us up shortly after and tells us that we should kill Francis instead, saying that Francis has called a meeting between the two of them. And so we're given another choice. Do we kill Francis or Derek? Francis is an asshole, but he'll pay us. And if we blackmail him by calling him during the mission, we also get the ability to remove up to a 3-star 1 level at any time. Derek is a drug-addled bum who probably should be put out of his misery, and killing Francis will get us nothing, but even then I think the choice is pretty simple. Literally within the same day that Francis is killed, Patrick calls us up and says that his funeral is happening soon, and he wants us to be there. Simple enough, I'm sure nothing bad'll happen, right? Of course, the funeral gets raided by the Albanians, and we have to drive the hearse containing Francis's casket to the cemetery. Should his casket comically fall out of the back of the hearse, the mission fails. Thankfully, the drive there isn't too long, and the mission is over in no time. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I'm gonna loop back to when we completed our final mission for Ray. Because shortly after that mission was taken care of, Ray calls us and tells us that he's found someone who may know where the person we've been searching for, Florian Kravik, is located. So we call up Rowan and bring him to the meeting point. Nico bringing Roman to the meeting is kind of comical, considering the fact that I'm sure in both of their minds, Florian is going to be some kind of hardened war criminal, so Nico bringing his softy cousin with him is kind of silly. But in reality, I'm sure that the writers needed him there with Nico to act like the voice of reason. When we find the informant, he says that he knows where Florian's apartment is, kinda, sorta. He doesn't have an actual street address, but he can give us directions. So we drag him along with us while he verbally calls out directions for us as we drive. Thankfully, the drive there is pretty short, so we won't have to deal with this guy for long. What follows is what should be considered a generally favorable portrayal of a gay person by 2008 standards.
Florian! I've come for you, Florian.
Oh, go away!
Sure, he's comically flamboyant, and sure, it's genuinely offensive by modern standards, but the fact that he's not reduced to being the butt of a joke and has actual character is pretty nice. Anyways, the long and short of things is that Florian, who now goes by Bernie, manages to convince Nico that he's not the guy that betrayed their unit, and says that the other guy, the last survivor, Darko Breivik, is the real culprit. And so our search has ended, coming up with a dead end. Darko is still in the old country, but that is something that can be changed. While we were working for the UL paper, they agreed to find our guy, something that won't be happening for quite a while still. In the meantime, we still have other work to do, including some for Bernie. But before we do that, we have one last mission to take care of for Ray. When we find him, he's on the phone with Isaac, one of the surviving members of the Jewish mob that we had to deal with in Museum Peace. Long story short, he wants us to kill the rest of them that are hiding out in a hotel. This is another one that can be boiled down to basically just a straight shootout, but still pretty fun though. Anyways, though, Bernie's first mission is actually pretty straightforward. He wants us to chaperone him to the park where he always goes for a run. Lately, he's been getting hollered at by some homophobic guy, so he wants our help in case things go south. Of course, they do, and now we have to go and chase the guy down and kill him, in a fittingly silly scooter chase. His second mission is a little less straightforward. You see, Bernie is in a relationship with Bryce Dawkins, deputy mayor of Liberty City. Our good pal Dimitri, yes, that's right, he's still poking around, is blackmailing Bernie and Bryce. He's sending someone to the press with information regarding this relationship, so our job is to get into a car chase and kill the guy before he can do that. Our last job for Bernie is actually his best, as it's probably the most unique one. He calls us up sounding distressed, telling Nico to meet him at the pier, where we find that he really wanted to only have a nice brunch with Nico. Nico is rightfully pissed, but still agrees to it, only to be ambushed by Dimitri's goons. This results in a pretty lengthy boat chase, which ends when the goons end up crashing and escaping on foot. That escape doesn't last long, of course. With the day saved, Bernie sails off, leaving us for the time being. He'll call us up later with news that he's received a special gift from Bryce, his very own orange Infernus. For those who don't know, the Infernus is the GTA equivalent of a Lamborghini, easily the fastest car in the game. They are very rare to find out in the wild, and this variant is the only one in the game to have an orange paint job, so take good care of this thing. With Bernie's loose ends tied up, we can move on to the second half of the Diamond Arc, which starts with us contacting Jerry McCreary in prison. He doesn't say much during our exchange, due to the swarms of police officers surrounding him, but he does tell us that Patrick will be in touch with the details. Basically, Jerry wants us to kidnap the daughter of the Ancelotti crime family's boss, Gracie. She's selling her disgusting pink sports car online, so the easiest way for us to get to her is to go online, set up a deal for the car, and snatch her then. We email her about the car, and she responds almost immediately, so thankfully we won't have to wait several in-game days for something to happen. Once we're there, Nico asks for a test drive, to which she agrees. It doesn't take long for Nico to tell her that we're actually trying to kidnap her, which leads to one of the most annoying parts of any mission in the game. She makes several vain attempts to swerve the car off the road, and whenever we pass a police car, she'll get us a 1-star wanted level too.
You're fucking with the wrong girl, asshole. I am Gracie Ancelotti, and I...
Shut up! He's class.
Once that happens, the mission is basically over. After that is taken care of, Patrick calls us up and tells us that he'll be in touch with step 2 of the plan. With all of that out of the way, though, we can go back to doing some tedious mob work. During our work for Ray, we were put into contact with a guy named Phil Bell, another capo in the Pellegrino crime family. After seeing our good work on full display for Ray, he offers us some work too. His first mission is actually pretty good, even if it is just a setup for his future jobs. The Triads have a pretty sizable stash of heroin, and he wants us to go and steal it. Sounds pretty easy on paper, but they've loaded into a truck and have it being guarded by about 24 goons. This makes taking care of business much harder. Doubly so when the truck takes off, forcing us to grab onto the back and hold on for dear life. This section is just wonderfully ridiculous, even if it is entirely unbelievable. Once we reach the cab, we cap the driver and take the truck to an abandoned house held by Phil's nephew, Frank. After the mission is over, Phil calls us up and tells us that he knows a guy who freelances out assassination contracts, and he thinks we might be a good man for the job. The guy only contacts people through payphone, though, to keep things as contact-free as possible. These missions are some of the few side activities that I actually really enjoyed, primarily because it's just more raw gunplay. The guy will contact us by payphone, tell us about the job, leave some equipment in the yard behind the payphone, usually armor and a weapon pertinent to the job, and tell us to get to it, leaving us to deal with it by any means necessary. These missions are given out in an entirely random order, though, since they have no effect on the story. But I did end up doing all of them, mainly just for the achievement you can get for doing so. Still pretty fun. With our work for Bell on hold, though, our next contact is none other than the Pellegrino head cheese himself, Jimmy, who is, spoiler alert, the main antagonist of the game from here on out. A bit weird that he appears so late into the game, especially since he's going to be very important very soon, but I digress. The next mission I do isn't even his anyways, it's Jerry's who I work for next. We're now on to phase 2 of the Gracie job, and this one is pretty straightforward. Sometime before this mission, we had to get back to the safe house to send a ransom picture to Mr. Ancelotti, which had caused them to throw some heat at Gracie. For the integrity of this operation, Jerry wants us to move her to a new place where she can be kept safely until the deal is arranged. Pretty simple mission overall, just drive to the new safe house while dealing with some unsavory Ancelotti hitmen. The last one for Jerry is unlocked almost immediately too, thankfully. With phase 2 of the plan out of the way, phase 3 can commence. We've finally managed to strike a deal with the people holding the diamonds, and have set up a deal for Gracie in the sewage works of Charge Island. When there, the deal goes surprisingly smooth. Luis, the guy who managed to grab the diamonds many missions ago, is here with his boss, Tony Prince, who is a major character in the game's second expansion, which is fucking named after the guy. And for a moment at least, it seems like all is not lost. There's not going to be some crazy shootout. They hand over the diamonds, and we hand over Gracie. And just as the coast seems clear, none other than Ray Bulgarian, you remember him, nice guy, right? Shows up to take the diamonds back. I mean, they are technically his, but whatever. What follows is another lengthy shootout where yet again, nobody gets the diamonds, which means Patrick and Nico are SOL again. But with the travesty of the diamonds out of the way, oh my fucking god. But with the travesty of the diamonds out of the way, we can begin our final stretch of work for the Pellegrino crime family, starting with our first job for Jimmy. As expected, he's an asshole, but for the time being, he pays us well for the work. Anyways, though, he's pissed that the Commission, a committee started to overlook all of the Mafia families in Liberty City, hasn't offered him a seat. He has to set up a meeting with one of the Commission families, the Pavanos, which should help him achieve this task somehow. Some vague Mafia nonsense about him giving an offering. I didn't really pay attention to this one. Look, the rest of this game is mostly just menial mob work anyways, which is easily the worst part of this game's mission arc. Really, this game did kind of peak all the way in the beginning, back when the missions were more closely tied to Nico as a character. Here, he's merely become a freelancer, doing anything for that cold hard cash, but I digress. The mission itself here is pretty straightforward, which means that it took me way more attempts than I'd care to admit. We had to drive Jimmy and 2 of his goons out to the meeting, only for them to get ambushed and Jimmy to get hit. After that, we needed to scoop him up and chase the remaining Pavano goons to get Jimmy's offering back. I fucked up once and blew up the car that had the offering in it on my first attempt, not realizing that, so that was a fun restart. His next mission, though, is thankfully much less involved. Go to the car dealership and wipe out the goons in a flashy gunfight. Simple as that. After that, we get another job from Phil, where the 2 of us have to invade a boating warehouse where the Russians have been smuggling drugs from Vice City. Another mission that is basically just a straight shootout. Get to the place, kill the guys, steal the boats. Pretty simple. After that routine job, though, we're contacted by our guy at the UL paper, saying that he has someone that he wants us to meet. That man is John Gravelli, the Don of the Gambetti crime family, the most powerful Italian mob group in Liberty City, and the head of the commission. He's one of those guys that's been in the business for so long that even the supposed good guys have to pay him his respects. With him being on his deathbed and all, he wants us to take certain measures to ensure that once he passes away, he won't have to worry about things falling out of place. Certain people gaining power, if you catch my drift. In all of his cutscenes, you can tell that even someone like Nico, who up until this point has shown very little respect for the people he's worked for, still has some underlying respect for someone like Gravelli. His first mission is one that is actually pretty interesting. For once, we're doing an escort mission. Well, kinda, sorta anyways. One of Gravelli's politician friends, because as a mob boss I guess he just has those, is going to give a speech on the crime in Liberty City, and he's convinced that some ill tidings will befall him. Our job is to keep an eye on him to make sure that he gets to City Hall in one piece. The first leg of the journey goes pretty smoothly, at least until we're stopped by construction and jumped by a platoon of Russian mobsters sent by our friend Dmitri. But I'm actually so good at the game, I actually managed to save one of the nameless bodyguards, only for them to get killed by the scripted trigger later in the mission. Either way, Mr. Jefferson is delivered to City Hall in one piece. Our next job for Gravelli is a lot more straightforward, though. Go to the place and kill the guy, not even remotely worth dwelling on. His last mission, on the other hand, is we need to sneak into a Russian drug compound to destroy the vans that they've been transporting coke in. Sounds easy on paper, but the only normal entrance into the compound is heavily guarded, meaning that we have to take this bunk-ass side path and climb on a bunch of stuff to get in. The payoff is worth it, though, since you get a much better vantage point on the fight, allowing us to swoop in and pretty much just clean house. With Gravelli's missions done, though, we still have some cleaning up to do for the other mob families before we can properly move on to the end of the game. Phil's next mission is another one that can be summed up in a single sentence. Go to this building, kill a bunch of dudes, and then blow up this guy in a helicopter. For additional style points, jump off the roof to fast travel back to the nearest hospital. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, though, is Phil's last job. And this one is an absolute banger. We need to take the heroin that we stored at Frank's place ages ago and offload it. The only problem being that Frank was too much of a moron to keep the feds off of it, meaning that we have to deal with the entirety of the actual FBI bearing down on us. This mission is a bloodbath, but besides the combat, one of my favorite little details about this mission is the fact that Frank's fate is entirely up to the player's skill. If you can manage to keep him alive, then he just lives. Mission dialogue will be altered, but besides that, it can still be completed normally if he dies. Just a cool detail, though. Either way, that's all of Phil's jobs done. Now we just have a few last things to take care of for Pegorino. When we show up at his place for his next mission, he walks out pointing a gun at Nico's face, so that can't exactly bring good tidings. He's gone full paranoid now, assuming, correctly in this instance, that all of his enforcers are rats. In this case, his personal bodyguard Anthony has apparently been wearing a wire the whole time. And that's no good for obvious reasons. But after threatening him, he suffered a heart attack and is now in the hospital, recovering under serious armed guard, of course. So we need to go in there and ice him. This can be done in two ways. One is the cut and dry run in and kill the guy, which is messy as you can imagine, but the other way is a little more subtle. We can sneak in and grab ourselves some doctor's scrubs in the locker room, allowing us to slip past the cops and kill Anthony quietly. And while I didn't mention it, there is actually a third option, which is to get the scrubs and still get spotted by the cops because you're a fucking idiot. And that definitely didn't happen to me. Still got the job done, though. Our last mission for Pegorino is no easier. He's called a meeting with his two remaining enforcers, and included us in the mix as well. He's in deep shit. The cops are up his ass and he doesn't know what to do. He's convinced that one of his two closest capos is a rat, although he won't spill it to their faces. He's unable to decide at that moment, so he sends us away and tells us that he'll call us once he's decided. And in the end, he decides on Ray, which is fine by me. He's kind of an asshole. Enough so to warrant a pretty messy hit and run. With this last job done, our work for Pegorino is through. Shortly after this, we get a call from the paper saying that they've finally flown our man, Darko Breivik, into the country, so now it's finally time. We pick up Roman and head out to the airport to meet him there. Again, bringing Roman is kind of a strange choice, but again, the devs just needed him there to be the angel on Nico's shoulder. Once we arrive, he's hauled out of a van and just left there, giving us the opportunity to take care of him as we see fit. While he is initially standoffish, he caves all the same. And you might be wondering what exactly possessed him to do all these things. Well...
1,000.
12 lives for $1,000. Roman tries to convince Nico to leave, but the decision is in our hands now. Sure, not killing him would mean that this entire search has really been for nothing. All of that meaningless mob work just for this. Besides, leaving him in a country where he can barely speak the language with no money and no connections is pretty cruel. But after all of this, is killing him worth it, though? After all of the killings, the robbings, the drugs, the kidnapping, the torture, does this one death really bring closure to Nico? Probably not. So the sensible option here is to follow Roman's advice and do the good thing for Nico. Walk away.
You say I ruined you?
Shit, my car was the other way. On the drive back to the apartment, Nico and Roman have another genuinely insightful conversation. Sure, not killing Darko didn't make Nico a saint, but it's a step in the right direction. Roman is vindicated, knowing that he was correct in deducing that there is still some good left in his cousin. And in the end, even if he'll never be able to get true closure, in knowing that the man responsible is dead, he can try to change himself, live a life that is as fulfilling as it can be. Either way, with that taken care of, there are only so many loose ends left to deal with. Dimitri, for one, who Pegorino wants to work with. Yeah, you heard me right. Apparently Dimitri has struck up a deal with Pegorino regarding the heroine we already killed so many to protect. Nico is rightfully entirely not on board with this plan, but after Pegorino refuses to take no for an answer one too many times, Nico relents, saying he'll think about it. Once outside the club, he calls Roman, who is shockingly on board with this plan, saying that despite all of their dirty dealings that they've had with Dimitri, he's convinced that this deal could finally be the gateway to even greater things. Pretty flawed logic there, but there's no convincing him of otherwise right now. So instead we call up, of all people, Kate, who is understandably convinced that this deal is a big fucking no-no, and that we should stay far away from it. Sounds like a good idea, but again, this choice isn't Nico's to make, as the fate is in our hands. Anyways, I'm just gonna cut to the chase here. Spoilers, the deal ending is just comically, just hilariously cruel. The deal goes south, as expected, with Phil and Nico barely escaping with their lives. But even worse, on the day that Roman gets married to Mallory, some goons roll up and kill him in an assassination attempt on Nico. And while yes, that does make the final confrontation against Dimitri even more satisfying, it still just isn't worth it. The only sensible ending is the aptly titled Revenge ending. In it, we go straight to the Platypus, the cargo ship we came to Liberty City on all of those hours ago, and storm the place. Dimitri is holed up in the bowels of the ship, and the only way to get down there is by heading through the cargo ports, which can only be opened by heading up to the bridge. So yeah, we have our work cut out for us. But after fighting through what seems like a nearly endless swarm of Russian mobsters, we can finally reach the brig where Dimitri is located. And after an intense shootout, we can finally confront him and kill him in one of the most satisfying executions in the game. With him dead, we can rest easy. Our biggest rival is gone. Well, besides Bulgarian, but he'll get his, don't worry. Either way, we head to Roman's wedding, and as expected, good vibes are had all around. We bring Kate along as our date, having our respect for not dealing with Dimitri. But of course, since this is a Grand Theft Auto game and someone has to die, something goes wrong. Pegorino, of all people, shows up to ruin everyone's day in an attempt to kill Nico. He's unable to do this though, and instead it's Kate that gets caught in the crossfire. Oh no, whatever will I do now? Yeah, Kate getting killed here is kinda lame. It would have had a bigger emotional impact if Kate was someone that you spent longer with outside of missions, because at the very least Michelle was involved in some pretty significant story stuff. But outside of the few cutscenes where she's present, Kate has zero impact on the story. You are never actually required to interact with her. Either way, this somehow manages to rack Nico with guilt, and we find him in his shabby original clothes in the crummy apartment in Bohan. Of course, since the last mission is coming up, and that means revenge on Pegorino, I immediately change him back into a nice suit, because I can't have my boy rocking crappy threads for his big day. Anyways, Lil Jacob, who was also present at the wedding, calls us up and tells us that he's found some of Pegorino's goons, and he thinks he'll be able to trail them back to where he's hiding. I'm not really sure why we didn't just try his house first, but I digress. What follows is a pretty lengthy car chase, where we back and forth with Roman and Jacob for a while, both of which still in their wedding clothes for some reason. Anyways, the chase does lead somewhere, as we're taken to an abandoned casino in Alderney, where Pegorino has stationed a ton of goons, meaning that he's bound to be inside. Nico opts to face the goons alone, telling Jacob and Roman to get out of there and find a plan B if all else fails. What results is a lengthy shootout. Lots of car explosions, plenty of dead mobsters, the usual suspects by now. When we catch up with Pegorino inside though, he runs off, and we're left to chase him down, first on foot, and then by bike while he goes on boat. While all seems lost when the coast ends, Jacob flies, yes, flies in with an attack helicopter. How exactly he got one of these is beyond our understanding, but I'm not going to look a gimp horse in the mouth here. We make this crazy jump into it and take control, having to weave past rockets fired by one of Pegorino's goons from the boat below. After a short chase, we eventually have to take an emergency landing on Happiness Island, analogous to the real-life Statue of Liberty. Pegorino's boat crashes too, so he's not far off now. And after shooting him another dozen times,
I told you to leave me alone.
I give the orders here. Me!
You're not looking so good there, Jimmy.
Screw you.
What the fuck did she ever do to you?
I wanted you, you immigrant dipshit.
Big talk. You want to know something funny?
Not really.
The commission, the old families. I know some of those guys. And they thought you were a fat fucking joke.
Whatever.
A joke!
And so it's over. Pegorino is dead, Dimitri is dead, hell, most of the people we've worked for are dead. Or have summarily cut ties with us. It's only the closest people we still have. Roman, Jacob, Patrick, Brucey, the good guys. As the credits roll, we're called up by Roman, saying Mallory is pregnant, and if it's a girl, they'll call it Kate in her honor. If you somehow couldn't tell by now, I greatly enjoy this game. Sure, not all of its facets have aged like wine, but what is still here is probably the best overall complete package in the series, at least in terms of quality. Sure, San Andreas and 5 may have more, but the quality of what is here in GTA 4 makes it probably a cut above the rest in my opinion. And sure, Rockstar might want to kind of bury this one, especially after GTA Online continues to be a perpetual money printing machine, but it's worth getting working because what is there is one of the best open world games. Nay, one of the best games, period. It's an experience that anyone who enjoys GTA even a little bit should play all the way through. It is immaculate, a time capsule of 2008, a peer into the darker side of crime, the one that doesn't always pay, the one that leaves you cold and alone and wanting to take 2 showers, because you're still suffering from the withdrawal of the American dream.